Okay. There is this green line here. I don't know what it is. So here, I'm mentioning some examples of household level survey data. So this share has is primarily focused on Europe, but it also has some other countries, and it's expanding, over time. So I believe Israel is now also part of share, but also some other countries. So this is a 50-plus data set. So household aging, survey on household aging every time in Europe, and it's a panel data set. And here you have the HFCS that I was mentioning, survey on household finances and consumption, and that's for Eurozone countries. And I should add here there's a fourth wave that came out in 24. So basically these are data from 2010, 2014, 2017, and 2021. So the COVID era. And that's Eurozone countries coordinated by the ECB. And okay, so here we start now going to this issue. This was descriptive, what I told you about the problems of collecting data, the types of data that exist. And here, what I want to do next is to give you an idea regarding, the method to make large-scale international comparisons. So when you have many countries that you are comparing across, of course, things are going to be different, but can you say something more, right? Methodologically, can you do something to decompose these differences? And when I was introducing the different topics on the syllabus, I told you that if you compare portfolios across countries, then the differences, one decomposition, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, is to assess the differences that are due to different composition of the population, so different configuration of population characteristics, versus differences that are in the coefficients on those characteristics. In other words, differences in the behavior for given characteristics, right? So it could be that populations are different. It could be that the behavior of any given set of population characteristics is different across countries. And what would be the interpretation of the sources of such differences, where the source of such differences would be a combination of policies and institutions of the country, but also cultural factors. You cannot decompose, you cannot distinguish between cultural differences and policies and institutions when you are comparing across countries, right? And after doing this, we're going to go to culture, then we're going to look at immigrants within a country coming from different countries. And then the policies and institutions are the same, and you can identify differences in culture, most likely coming from culture. Okay, but right now we are in this first stage. We are going across countries. It will be characteristics versus a combination of culture and policies and institutions. Okay, so that's what. Now this paper, as I told you, we finished in 2011. In 2013 it was published, and it was referring to data from 2004. Okay, that was the first wave of share, and it was not the first wave of the others. So the mother of all older people surveys, 50-plus surveys, is the Health and Retirement Survey in the US, which still continues, and it's a great source of panel data, but focused on the 50 plus. And we are using only one survey, one wave from 2004. And then this ELSA is an interesting construct. This is in Britain, and this is the English Longitudinal Survey on Aging, right? Which is a female name, so it sounds nice. But it's actually English. So you know that England has its own football club, football team, and Scotland has its own football team. So this ELSA is the Longitudinal Survey on Aging for England. It doesn't include, Scotland, let alone Northern Ireland, Wales, whatever. Just okay. And the first wave in share, you see the list of countries, and you see, some countries like Sweden and Denmark that have very developed social security systems and very developed financial sectors. You see Germany, of course, being the largest here, and then you see a mixture of southern and northern countries. And for Belgium, the data are from 2005 because they were collected a little bit later than the others. Okay. Now this is the graph that you have seen, the table that you have seen. I showed you also in macro and but also in the introduction to the topics. Here I want to focus on a couple more detailed features. Okay. So first of all, what are we seeing? Okay. So this is, the green columns are network, are giving us amounts, right? And they are conditional amounts. So everybody has a net worth amount. So, conditional and non-conditional would be the same. But here you have stocks. You see stocks. You see home, primary residence, and you see the mortgage on the primary residence, on the home. But not everybody holds stocks. Not everybody owns their home. Not everybody has a mortgage on their home. So these amounts are referred to the sample of holders of each thing. So these amounts refer. So this is median stock holding among stockholders, right? Quantiles among owners. This is median, the median amount spent on the house by people who own the house, and here for the mortgage. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that if I go across the table, this is not the same household. So the median household in net worth is not the median stockholder. Is not, in general, is not the median homeowner, right? So these are different households in general. But it gives you an idea of the distribution of holdings among holders of the particular asset or debt. Okay. Now, how comparable are these numbers? These numbers are all in thousands of dollars, of 2004 dollars, right? And they are PPP adjusted, purchasing power price adjusted. So they are as comparable as it gets, right? So if you see that Americans, the median American is investing what, has, well, here, the median American stockholder has $49,500 in stocks. That's 5 times as much as the median stockholder in this set of European countries. The other thing is we call it Europe, but it's actually this set of countries plus England, right? So that's what we call Europe. It's not that really Europe. But these numbers are very comparable, right? It can be compared in size. I mean, wine is 5 times the other. Okay. Then what do you see? I mean, if you're looking at these numbers, you know what we are doing here is we're saying, okay, let's look at the United States as a whole. Let's look at Europe as a whole. And then within the Europe meaning this set of countries, okay? Within the United States, we go by the 4 regions that we can observe in the data. Of course, you know, in household finance surveys, the first thing that gets omitted, not reported, is region, is location. Because, you know, if you know exactly where somebody lives, and then you observe their entire portfolio, maybe you can figure out, yeah, that's my rich neighbor next door, right? So one of the most sensitive bits of information is location, and it's a problem. It's a big problem for PFX literature, you know, looking at neighbors and how you're influenced by your neighbors. Big problem there, but you know, luckily there are some countries and data sets that include such information. But here we only have that. But what is the point of, you know, if we have United States, why do we want to go by region? We want to see how integrated the United States is, right? The United States is a single country. It has a single government and a single monetary authority, right? And we want to see how much do portfolios across different regions in the country differ, right? Now Europe is a different ball game. Europe has a single monetary authority, the ECB, but it has multiple governments, right? Different governments. And we want to see how similar European countries are with between them. You know, that's part of what we want to see. So, you know, we do that type of analysis as well, and that's why we look at country level data. Okay. Now, what do you see here on participation rate, stock market participation? You see that the participation, so this is participation among older people, don't forget that. So the younger out, it's 50 plus. So you would expect all these numbers to be higher than if we were looking at the entire population, right? Because these people, the 50 plus, have more assets. Okay, so you see that close to 50% of older Americans participate in the stock market directly or indirectly. You see that the number for this set of European countries, the corresponding is 26%. So you see a much bigger participation rate in the US than in Europe, in this set of European countries as a whole. Then you go within the US, and you see that there is some variation, but little variation by region. You go within Europe, and it's from day to night. Look at Sweden, 71% of older people participate in the stock market. I told you there is the Social Security Swedish system that encourages everybody, you know, to invest part of their Social Security wealth in the market, and that has spillovers on other types of stockholding. You see a very high number for Denmark as well, and you know, you go to Austria and you see 10% of the people only participate, of the older people participate in the stock market. Italy, 10.4%. So there is huge variation within Europe. There is very little variation by comparison within the US. Okay. Now, where is this variation coming from? Is it coming from different characteristics of the European populations across them? Right? Are the Swedes, you know, very wealthy, and the Austrians and the Italians very poor, and that's what explains it? Or, you know, are there policy, institutional, maybe also cultural factors that explain it? This is what we will try to see. Then you go to home ownership. Okay, so so how many people own, what share of households own the house they live in. And they see that for the US, among 50 plus, 77.3 own the house they live in. The others rent. Okay, you see a little bit of a bit of variation across regions, but again, not so dramatic variation. You look at this set of European countries, it's lower by 10 percentage points, but then you see variation, and you see considerable variation given what we're talking about, which is home ownership, not stock ownership. So look at Spain, 86.9% home ownership. Look at Greece, 84.3%. Look at Italy, 75.1%. And look at Germany. Germany has the lowest home ownership rate in Europe. Only 1 in 2 of all their households own the house they live in. So I remember, as I was growing up and as I was a kid in Greece, when my parents would take me to a relative's house and I realized they were renting but not owning, I was feeling sorry for them. They are so poor, they cannot afford to own, etc. Now I'm one of them. I rent in Germany, right? And there are reasons, for that. Actually, it's a pretty good deal in Germany. We are renting the same place for now 18 years. And the rent is pretty much the same as it was actually 15 years ago. They can't kick you out. So the rental contracts in Germany don't have an end point, for example. And you can also write off taxes if you have a mortgage on some other house. So we bought an apartment that we are renting out, but we don't live in that apartment. So it's optimal to be renting somewhere else and not living in the place that you own. Because if you have a mortgage on that, then you can write off the taxes of the mortgage if you're renting out. But if you're living in the house, you can't. So that's German law. In other countries, it's the opposite, right? But what I'm trying to say is people are not stupid. They respond to incentives, right? And it would be good to see to what extent these differences, within Europe correspond, what they are, and to what extent they correspond to such incentives, etc. But you see a lot of variation here as well. And the third thing is participation in mortgages. So what share of people have a mortgage on their primary residence, right? And you see in America it's just under 40%, with again not such big variation across countries, across regions. The West is a little bit bigger. You look at Europe, 14.7% overall, but you see enormous variation. So here you see, the countries with very high home ownership, like Spain and Greece and Italy, down here, with very limited participation in mortgages. And you see northern countries, like Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, with enormous, close to 50% participation in mortgages. So your grandma probably thinks poor countries, poor southern countries, are going to be borrowing like crazy for the house, whereas northern countries can afford the house and they don't need to get a mortgage. And here you see the opposite. What do you think is going on? How come high home ownership, poorer countries don't have mortgages? What do you think might be possibility here?
Maybe receive the home from their ancestor, like their parents?
Precisely, that's a big thing, right? So you get a house from your parents, right? Or you inherit it after they die. So you don't need to get a mortgage for that, right? And maybe you are renting until you get the house. In my generation, my parents' generation, it was quite typical for parents to give a whole house at the wedding time to the children, and especially to the women. And it was called the dowry, right? I think in Asia it's the opposite, right? Yes? You go to the house of the husband. Yes? But that's the opposite from Europe, right? So, well, certainly when this was a very dominant practice, the husband would go to the house of the wife, right? So very different, these are the cultural issues. And nowadays, of course, you are giving gifts, not necessarily a house, thank God, for me. And then, your children are waiting for you to die to inherit, but they get it eventually. That's a big thing. A second thing also is, if you get a house and you are stuck in it forever, you don't have to get a mortgage to buy a more expensive house, right? So these people, in the rich northern countries, they tend to upgrade, right? So they get a mortgage for the extra value of the house. They sell the old one, and then they get a mortgage for the extra, and they buy a new one. So actually, having high participation in mortgages can be a sign of health, right? Financial health and mobility, as opposed to misery and need and I don't know what else. But we were very, my authors are also Greek in this paper, and we were very amused because we wrote this paper at the start of the fiscal crisis in Europe, and the Northerners were pointing the finger at us and at the Southerners and saying, you are borrowing too much, you're borrowing too much. And then we got the data, and they are the ones borrowing too much, and we're not borrowing so much. Okay. So that's that's another lesson from this table. And then, let's go to net worth, and that was a shock to Germans. Germans were, extremely unhappy about this aspect. So look at Germany, net wealth in Germany, okay? So net wealth in at the low end of the distribution, the 25th percentile, $11,800. The median wealth is $95.4 thousand, and the 75th percentile is 272. Look at Spain. Spain was one of the fiscally troubled countries, right? Look at Italy. What's going on at the bottom? 11.8 in Germany, 73.2 in Spain, 46.4 in Italy. So the poorer Spaniards and Italians are richer than the poorer Germans. And even Greece, 55.8, richer than the poorer Germans, right? You go to median net wealth, they say, low net wealth. Part of this, of course, a big part of this is, the 25th percentile doesn't own a house, right? So the net wealth of Germans at this level doesn't include a house. Then you go to the median, 95.4 thousand. Go to Spain, 140. Go to Italy, 149.5. Go to Greece, 112, right? So no comparison even in the median. because actually the median, household in the population probably doesn't have a house. I mean, it is 51.2%, marginally has a tiny house, right, in Germany. But of course, the median has, a good house in those southern countries. And then you go to the 75th percentile, and you see here, 272.6, you go to Spain, okay, a little bit above, you go to, a little bit below, you go to Italy, they have even more, you go to Greece, of course, is considerably below. So the difference between Germany and the South starts showing at the top end of the distribution. And of course, it explodes in the very top end, right? At Goethe University, there's a very nice statue, actually the one you see here. You see the thing behind me? Do you see the thing?
Yeah.
Yes? So that's a statue, that's a metal statue made of letters. Latin letters, Greek letters, Chinese letters, I don't know what else, right? All of letters. It's very beautiful. You can even go inside it. Okay. So this is a very expensive piece of art. This was donated to Goethe University by Mrs. BMW. So, BMW, right? BMW, the car, yes? So, one of the women that owned the company, yeah? So she donated this. So if she has so much money to be, spreading around, she's very rich, right? So the top wealthy people who wouldn't be in this data set anyway, but the top wealthy people in Germany are extremely rich. But you see that for the most of the distribution, their net wealth is below the net wealth in the South. So why were the Germans extremely upset? Because in the fiscal crisis, they were asked to support Greece, and they were asked to support the other countries that were fiscally troubled, and the newspapers came out and they said, we are sending money to the rich Southerners, we are subsidizing the rich Southerners, whereas we are poor ourselves. Okay? Okay, let me say one fun thing or one depressing thing for us, and then let me go to substance and discuss this claim or this argument. So the sad thing for us was when our paper got published in 2013, the newspapers wrote nothing. Nobody read our paper. No journalist read our paper in the Review of Economic Statistics. But in 2013, the ECB released the first findings of the Household Finances and Consumption Survey. And that was the first time that wealth data was available for Germany and across countries, right? So it was based, and of course they were coming to the same similar conclusions that Germans are poor relative to, have low net wealth relative to the South, etc. So German journalists jumped after the release of the ECB data. Okay, now why are they wrong? What are they missing here? And I'm saying this because you have to be careful when comparing across countries what gets reported, what doesn't get reported. So one big thing that's missing from these data, from SHARE but also from HFCS, is pension wealth. So what is pension wealth? Pension wealth, how would you compute your pension wealth? It would be damn difficult for you to compute your pension wealth because you don't yet have jobs, you don't know your future, right? Once you start your career, you form an expectation of your pension, and then pension wealth is the expected present value of all of your pensions. So you take, statistical survival tables, right? You compute what is your expected length of lifetime, right? How long you can expect to live, based on your year of birth, your country, your gender, and whether you're a smoker, things like that, right? So you form an estimate of your expected length of life, you form an estimate of the expected pension, and then you take some reference interest rate and you compute the expected present value of your pensions. And that's your pension wealth. Now, in my description or definition, you can see the problems, the enormous problems, right? Because when do you figure out what your final job is going to be, what your expected pension is going to be, right? It's very noisy, you don't know it. It's very difficult to figure it out. I am one of the most boring people on earth from an occupational perspective, hopefully only from that perspective. But I am a German civil servant. There is a formula computing my pension, right? Formula, which doesn't depend on anything. I mean, it depends on how many years I have worked for the system, but at 66 and a half, they will, they know how many years. And when I get it next year, and they also know, my salary, the latest salary, they know the parameters. And even I can't tell you how much my pension is going to be, because I have to ask. It's not posted anywhere. There is no app to let me calculate that. So somebody knows in the ministry, but I'm not even allowed to ask very frequently because they have other things to do. So I can ask once every 5 years or something like that. So that's what's going on, right? So they can be, okay, now imagine us, the survey collectors, the survey data collectors, right? I mean, I don't know my pension and I'm 1 year from retirement, right? How can I, as a survey collector, calculate the expected present value of pensions, the pension wealth, of all the people in this data set, even though they are 50 plus? And how am I going to be able to do it in the Household Finances and Consumption Survey, where there's everybody, even 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds? It's impossible. I mean, nothing is impossible, but you have to make so many assumptions that you then worry that your data, your numbers are going to be very biased, very wrong. So we don't do it. So Germans, if Germans have a better pension system, a more reliable pension system than the Greeks, that's not reflected in these data. And indeed, in the fiscal crisis, Greek pensions, even of civil servants, dropped dramatically, right, relative to promises before, right? So you don't expect this to happen in Germany. So pension wealth is missing. The other thing, another thing that's very impossible to measure is the access to the welfare state, the so-called welfare state. What is that? I mean, you have the unemployment benefits system. You have the disability benefit system. You have all sorts of welfare systems for low-income people, for, single mothers, for homeless, whatever category you can think of that is entitled to some benefit. You have a more generous benefit system in Germany than you have in the South. So that is not included in these pension calculations. You should ideally be making a calculation of this expected value of the welfare system as well, right? And then there is the reliability, the risk. How about the health system? If there is a very good public health system, you don't have to pay or to pay much for health. But Greeks don't have a very good public health system, so they in some sense they have to be rich in order to meet, for precautionary reasons, right? In order to meet unexpected health expenditure shocks, unexpected, fires, destruction by fire and flood, etc., for which there is not a good insurance system, unexpected changes in their pensions, right? So it's very naive and very superficial just to be looking at these figures and going across countries and saying who is richer and who is poorer, because people respond to incentives and people respond to the economic environment, right? So that can justify lots of these differences. And there are also some more nerdy, pedantic differences, like household size tends to be bigger in the south than in the north, and of course, if you have more people around, you need a bigger house, or maybe there are some adult members who are working as well and contributing to household income and stuff like that. Okay, so that is that. Okay, that's what I wanted to say on the basis of this descriptive table, but you're beginning to get an idea of the challenges, but also the sources of interesting facts that one tries to understand. Okay, now this was from 2004. How about recent things? So recent data. So this is actually a report that was produced in 2022 by two of my authors, but now working, with other people, and actually one former co-author on a different project. So this is 2022, and you see Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, Italy, Netherlands, and you see stock market participation rates, directly held stocks, and here are directly and indirectly in mutual funds. And you see what is happening across three different educational groups, right? So they are splitting by education. So these are less than high school people. These are people with a high school certificate but no college degree. These are people with college degree or more, right? So what do you see here? You see that, there is an education gradient in all of the countries. So it is true that as you go across these sets of bars, whether you're talking about direct stock holding or you are talking about total stock holding, direct and indirect, there is an upward slope, there's a positive slope in education. We call that an education gradient. Point number two here, what's going on in terms of participation rates? Well, you see here Belgium and Germany have the highest participation rates, close to 50%. But who are these people? These are the people who are the college graduates or more. Right? So you have college graduates or more participating 50-50 in stocks. So the most educated people in the country. And even they don't satisfy the standard model, right? So that's what I'm talking about. And then you see the variation in the other countries. And the other thing that you see is that across countries, there is considerable variation as well. So you get these higher participation rates here. You see the low participation rates. And by the way, this is now not the 50 plus, this is not the 50 plus sample, this is the total population. So you see the lower participation rates in Spain and in France, and you see also in Italy compared to Belgium and Germany. And you see that the Netherlands is somewhere in between, sort of, the north and the south, but maybe closer to the south than to the north. So things are fluid, things keep changing, but we are extremely far from saying that everybody holds stocks with them. So this is probably due to Yapeli, because he's the author in our Household Portfolios volume chapter that I showed you, and also in this one. And these diagrams look the same: gross financial wealth deciles, not net, not subtracting. So when you compute net financial wealth, you are supposed to subtract consumer loans, gross financial assets minus consumer loans. If you are computing net real wealth, you are putting real assets like house, private business, investment real estate, and you are subtracting mortgages. Okay, so net real wealth, you are putting the real assets, subtracting mortgages. When you are looking at net financial wealth, you are putting all the financial assets, you subtract consumer loans, right? So unbacked loans, uncollateralized loans, right? Here they are not subtracting, so they are just looking at gross financial assets, the distribution of those. So what do you see? You see very similar things that we were seeing also at the end of the 1990s. You see that the rich have substantially bigger participation rates than the poor in each country. And that the poor in each country and across countries tend to be very similar, close to zero or at zero participation in the stock market. So, and how high up the rich are depends on the country. But these are relatively similar countries, so you get quite a bit of similarity in the top positions, but you see the pattern. Very similar pattern as we have found 25 years earlier. Okay, so as I was telling you, we want to decompose now these differences and assign part of them to differences in composition of the relevant household pool. And these are the covariates, what we call covariates, the set of characteristics of the households participating in the particular asset or debt. So these would be covariate effects, or differences arising from the composition of population. And the other part is differences in behavior of households with given characteristics. So these would be what we call coefficient effects. So maybe the variables that you're multiplying with are similar, but the set of coefficients of those variables is different across countries. Right? So we want to decompose. In practice it would be both. So we want to decompose between the two. And as you will see, it's not even guaranteed that these differences are going to be in the same direction. So maybe, characteristics are pushing in one direction, and coefficients, behavior is pushing in another direction. And then one dominates the other, and you are just observing the net effect in the difference in the participation rates or in the amounts, right? So we're going to see that. And the other thing which is not clear is maybe, we estimate these covariate effects and coefficient effects, and they don't need to be statistically significant, right? Maybe they are not statistically significant. Maybe one of the two is statistically significant and the other isn't. Maybe both are, right? So we have to examine that as well. It's not sufficient to just do one estimation, get a point estimate, and forget about it, right? The idea is, do the data allow us to estimate statistically significant differences? Now, I think we were the first to apply this methodology to household finance data. Where did we get the idea from, or the methodology? We got it from the labor economics and the literature on discrimination. And I'm going to describe this in a couple of minutes so that you understand the motivation of the method. So suppose that you want to study whether there is gender discrimination in pay, right? In wages. So what you would do would be, if you can get the data, of course, would be to get the data on the distribution of wages of women, say in Germany, and of the distribution of wages of men in Germany. And you would plot them, say, on the same graph, and you would typically find that the distribution of wages of men is above the distribution of women's wages. Okay. So you would say, you could say, just on the basis of that, that's a gender gap, that's discrimination. Okay? But you shouldn't really say that, right? Because what may be happening here is that the population characteristics, the characteristics of men, the wage relevant characteristics of men are different from the wage relevant characteristics of women. So part of this difference in wages could be due, for example, to bigger seniority of men, that men have worked for more years than women, or more men in the sample in that population that you are considering have worked longer than women, or they are more educated, say, than women, or whatever, or they are older. I mean, just comparing two distributions isn't enough to establish discrimination. So the labor market, the labor economists devised this method to decompose the difference in the wage distribution, say, between, across men and women, between the differences that are due to differences in the configuration of characteristics of men versus women, and differences that are for similar characteristics. Okay? So the covariate effects that have to do with the composition, they are out. They are not part of the discrimination literature, at least in the first approximation. However, the coefficient effects, the differences that are due to coefficients, do point to discrimination, because you're saying for similar characteristics, women are getting paid less, right? So that's a much more convincing argument in favor of discrimination, in favor of finding discrimination, right, than just comparing the raw distribution. Now, you can go to covariates and you can have bigger arguments about covariates. So why is it that women have bigger seniority, right? So does it have to do with policies? If they take time off to give birth to children, maybe to raise children, where do they go back? Can they go back? At what level? All of this. So one could say that, there may be items relevant for discrimination even in the covariates, but the first order, impression of discrimination is that for given characteristics, these people, men are getting paid more, right? So our idea was, let's use this, that for given characteristics, people across countries behave differently with respect to the household finance outcomes that we are studying. Okay. Now, as you are comparing people in different countries, right? If you are finding that the coefficient effects for regions, like in the US, the coefficient effects are insignificant or are very small, right? Then this could suggest that there is similarity in institutional framework, in policy framework in the economic environment, but it could also suggest that there is bigger access to foreign markets, foreign financial markets. So I told you Norwegians invest in US stocks. And so to the extent that we promote capital markets integration, and there is now a push in Europe to promote capital market integration across the countries, but it's moving extremely slowly. If I'm sitting in Greece and I can buy Swiss products or German products or UK products or whatever else, then the coefficient effects will tend to be smaller, right? My location will matter less and the policy institutions of the country I'm in will matter less for my behavior. So in some sense, coefficient effects are capturing quite a bit of things. So they're telling us something about, maybe, but it's not easy to decompose. So maybe, they are capturing cultural differences, policies and institutions, and they're also capturing, international capital market integration, access to foreign financial markets. Okay. So here are the things, if you want to see these things highlighted that I was saying before, here they are, right? I had forgotten I had those slides later on. Otherwise, I would have shown them to you with the yellows. I showed them, I talked about them without the yellows, but here are the yellows, okay? So that's that. Okay. So what is the methodology of this decomposition? So we're going to talk about two things: participation rates, differences in participation rates. So these orange things, and we are also going to talk about differences in conditional amounts. And here on the table, we are only looking at the 25th, 50th, 75th percentile, but what we are going to be plotting is actually results for every 5th percentile of the distribution, not just the 3. Now, what is the econometric method to do this? So for participation, it's based on profit estimation. For amounts, it's based, because we have a whole distribution of the level of stock holding across, from small stockholders to large stockholders, right? So the method is quantile regression. I mean, maybe you've heard of median regression, right? You've heard of median regression? No? You can estimate, I mean, it's like, the typical regression, the standard regression estimates the mean, at the mean of the distribution, and tells you what's happening in the mean of the distribution of stock holdings or wealth or whatever else. But you can also do these quantile regressions. So instead of the mean, you are focusing on the median, and you're finding the effects of different characteristics on the median holdings. But you can do this for each quantile, each percentile in principle. So we did it for the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, 20th, etc. Every 5th percentile, we run a quantile regression. And why would you want to do that, right? You would want to do that to allow for different relevance of a certain factor. So suppose, how much does income influence your stock holdings? This may be, the coefficient of that may be smaller, different for a low income person, for a small stockholder than for a big stockholder, right? So with quantile regressions, what you are doing is allowing the data to tell you if the influence of a given factor is the same across different percentiles in the distribution of the outcome, or is it different, right? So that's what quantile regressions allow you to do, and we actually use them to get point estimates for each fifth percentile, and then we draw a curve around, through them. Okay, then what do we want then? Then we look at these results of coefficient and covariate effects. So the covariate is the part that's due to the population composition, and the coefficient is the part that's due to all this economic environment that I described. And then we say, okay, can we link differences due to coefficients in particular, so the economic environment, to existing indicators of institutional and policy environment? So what we are not going to do a lot of this, I'm not going to go through it, but you can see it in the paper just to get an idea. So the first thing is that we do is eyeball econometrics. Eyeball econometrics, have you heard about that? So you look at different columns and say, oh, they move together. Okay, so that's eyeball econometrics. It's not a recognized. Professor Binder does not recognize eyeball econometrics, right? He will tell you to look at the data, but eyeball econometrics is not enough. Then the referees push us to do regressions, to take these coefficient effects and to regress them on a bunch of characteristics of the countries. But we did this despite the fact that we had something like 11 or 12 observations, which is ridiculous. It's a completely ridiculous number to be running OLS regressions. But when the referees insist that you do something, otherwise they don't publish your paper, they don't agree to publish your paper, you do it. And you bring to their health as well. So we did it. You can see it, but I don't think it's very important. And then we did, in the paper, we did 3 types of comparisons. We did US versus each European country. And then we did within the US and within Europe. So you have to pick, in the US versus Europe, US is the base country, and each European country is compared to it. Within the US, we just picked the Midwest as the benchmark, and then we're comparing the others to the Midwest. Within Europe, we picked Germany as the largest country as the benchmark, and we're comparing others to Europe. I'm not going to, I'm going to show you the first set of results. Maybe I spent a couple of minutes on the others. And the point, of course, here is not to memorize, which way coefficient and covariate effects go. By any means, don't memorize things, but just to illustrate the method and how reasonable results we are getting from this method. Okay, so let me go through this first thing. So this is now counterfactual decomposition of participation rates. So what do we start with? So we start with the actual participation rate in the US. So what did we have? Stock market participation rate in the US, 49.7%, right? Among the older people. So we plug this in here. And then we want to compare the USA to Germany, right? We look, or since I remember it, we can compare it to Austria, which had 10.1% stock market participation, right? So we plug in the stock market participation rate for Austria. So that's the actual difference in participation between US and Austria. And now we want to decompose this difference into covariate effects and into coefficient effects. So to do that, we need to construct this animal over here. You see what's happening over here? I'm subtracting this animal from participation in the US, and I'm adding it back in and subtracting participation in Austria from that, right? So what is this animal? So this is called counterfactual decomposition. This is a counterfactual average probability of participation. So how do I come up with that? I want to figure out, first of all, conceptually, I want to figure out how Austrians, households with Austrian characteristics, would behave if they were faced with the US economic environment. Okay? Right? I want to figure out how households with Austrian characteristics would behave if they were faced with the US economic environment. The US economic environment is captured in the coefficients of the US profit, right? The Austrian characteristics are captured in the excess in the data of the Austrian sample, right? So how am I going to construct this counterfactual probability? I'm going to run a probit, only one probit. It's going to be the probit on US data, the participation probit on US data, right? I'm going to get the coefficients from the US probit, the betas, right? So there will be a coefficient on income, a coefficient on wealth position, a coefficient on age, a coefficient on education, okay? I'm only going to get the betas, store the betas, right? And then I'm going to get the excess, the data of the Austrian sample, okay? So the characteristics of Austrian households. And for each Austrian household, I'm going to use the US coefficients to compute the probability that the Austrian household would have to participate in the stock market if it were faced with the US economic environment. Understand what I'm saying? Have you lost me? Are you with me? You have lost me? You're with me? No. Okay? So this is the counterfactual probability for that Austrian household, right? And I'll take then the next Austrian household and do the same, plug it into the US profit. Counterfactual probability that the second Austrian household would participate in the stock market if it were faced with US economic environment. And I will do this for all the Austrian households. And I will compute the average probability, average counterfactual probability. So this is the average probability that Austrians from, the Austrian sample, people with characteristics of the Austrian sample, would be participating in the stock market if they were faced with the US economic environment. Okay? Yeah? So that's beta US times XI, right? X Austria. So what do you see here then? You have the actual participation rate in the US. You can think of this, but don't, you can think of this as being beta US times X US, right? If our model is correct, this would have been beta US times X US. You subtract from that beta US times X Austria. So this difference, this subtraction that you are getting, right, is coming from where? It has the same coefficients. It uses beta US, it uses US coefficients. Both of these things are using US coefficients. But this one is using, of course, US is based on US characteristics. This one is based on Austrian characteristics. So this difference is not due to the coefficients, it's due to the characteristics, right? US versus Austria. So this difference captures covariate effects, right? Yeah? With me? Without me? This difference, what is this? You can think of this, this is beta US times X Austria. And you can think of this as beta Austria times X Austria. So this difference is coming from the coefficients, because I'm comparing beta US to beta Austria, right? So these are the coefficient effects. This makes sense? You follow this? This is the key thing. When I do the quantile regressions, it won't be participation probits, it will be quantile regression, but the logic will be exactly the same. That's all there is to it, okay? But let me tell you one more thing that I realized yesterday, that I stressed this beta US. I realized yesterday, talking to somebody's brother, who is doing this, using these methods for his thesis, right? His master thesis. And I stressed too much that this is beta US x US. And this is beta Austria x Austria. It's not, right? You can do it with running separate probits for US and for Austria, etc., doing double the work. But you don't need to do that. You can use here the actual participation rate. You can use the numbers from the data, right? You don't need to be running this probit and this Austrian probit and all the other European probits and doing all the subtractions like that. Okay? You can use the actual participation rate here in the US, the actual participation. But how you think about it, how you understand that this is a covariate effect, that this is a coefficient effect, for that thought process, it helps to think of this as beta US times x US minus beta US times x Austria, and correspondingly here, as opposed to just thinking of this as a single number, right, that you get from the data. Clear? Yeah? Okay, then you say, what am I going to control for? So Share has lots of interesting data. These are not necessarily available in HFCS or in other population-wide data sets. So what are we able to control for? So we actually do here, we don't do the age brackets, but we do a second order age polynomial, just choice, household size, education, what level of education you have, recallability. So in the shared data set, how do they measure that? So that's a measure of cognitive ability. So they show these people 50 plus, 50 all the way to 103. They show these people a card with different objects, 10 different objects. And then they take the card away and they say, write down the objects that you saw. And then they measure how many objects they remember, right? Correct? So that's a measure of recallability, which is a measure of cognitive ability. Okay, they don't give them IQ tests to do, but that's important.
What is the second order age?
That's what we chose there. It gives you a little bit of shape. Either this or that. I wouldn't have done it this way today. I would have done the age brackets today. The age brackets is more, as we were discussing, it's more open to the data. The data will tell you, does it go this way, does it go this way, is it flat? Whereas you are, if you are putting a straight bracket of a second order polynomial, then you're forcing it to go a particular way. But, okay. I mean, you are not, as you know, we are not, this is not a good way to estimate age effects, because we have no way to control for, time is just one time, and cohort effects, etc. So, we are uncovering a coefficient on age, but it's not strictly speaking age. Okay. Then you see self-reported bad health. You see, this is and we didn't do the vignettes, for the pessimistic Greeks but there are no Americans in the sample, so it's okay. But still, Germans are much more reserved than Greeks are, or Italians, so you are likely to get some differences there. And then number of ADL. So ADL is activities of daily life, with which the person has trouble. This is a measure of objective health status. What I was telling you before. So, are you able to get out of the bed, get to dress yourself, to go to the bathroom alone, to feed yourself, go down the stairs, blah blah blah. So the number, that's an objective number. You know, they report, you know, how many of these things they can do, and that's our measure of objective measure of health. And in some sense, controlling for this controls a little bit for overconfidence or whatever in the subjective measure. And then work status, of course, marital status. And then share also asks people what is the probability that you're going to leave a positive bequest or even a substantial bequest, right? How likely is it that you're going to put so? And actually, some people have used these responses, inheritance, to the positive bequest to your descendants. And some people, other people have used these questions to estimate expected bequest, which is a difficult thing, right? Normally you don't have this data, but Share does have the data. Then whether the household provides help to relatives, neighbors, is involved in voluntary activities, so that's whether there's altruism, right? Because we get responses like that in the survey. Not every survey asks these questions. But altruism might be relevant here, because if you're very altruistic and you're giving away your wealth to others, right, then you're going to have lower wealth levels. And then the income quartile and the wealth quartile, so that your position in the income and in the wealth distribution of your origin country. Okay? But now, with these two things, we have some trouble, right? There is an issue to decide. Because what do we want to do? We want to take the Austrians, right, and confront them with the US environment, right? But an Austrian who is in the top 25% of the Austrian wealth distribution might not be in the top 25%, or income distribution, might not be in the top 25% of the US distribution, right? So how does one do this? Well, one has to make an executive decision on that. So one possible choice is to say, the Austrian who is in the top quartile, is going to get top quartile treatment also in the US, right? So let's use the top quartile coefficient for that. We opted for the second choice, which is to say, let me look at the actual wealth level. So the wealth level matters more than the relative position. So we opted, it doesn't need to be true, that's how we thought, right? So we opted to say, okay, let's take the actual wealth level of this Austrian who is in the top 25% of the Austrian distribution, and let's see where this Austrian would be in the US wealth distribution, and give them that coefficient, the coefficient for that quartile of the US distribution. Now, it's a detail, right? But I'm illustrating to you the kinds of things, considerations that you have to resolve going across countries, right, and making these international comparisons. Now, we do this, right? And suppose we do it for Austria, what do we get? We have the raw number, the raw difference, and we get one number here for the covariate effect and one number here for the coefficient effect. Are these numbers statistically significant? Are coefficient effects and covariate effects statistically significant, or are they not, right? That's something that I need to figure out. So how do we figure it out? We repeat this exercise about 200 times. I mean, depending on how fast the computer you have and how much time you have, you can choose how many times you want to do it. We did it 200 times. But you have to be careful, because what are you going to do 200 times? If you take the US data and you run 200 times the profit, you're going to get 200 times the same results, right? And you take the Austrian data, you're going to get 200 times the same results. So that cannot be what you're doing. So what do you do? So you take the US, so you have done this for the actual samples and everything. That's your point estimate. And then what you do is, you go to the US sample and you draw, if it's 2,000 people or something, you draw with replacement 2,000 observations from the US sample. So what does it mean? So you draw randomly with replacement 2,000 observations from the US sample. What does it mean with replacement? Well, the fact that I drew a household doesn't mean that this household disappears. Otherwise I would be left without anybody. I would still get the same households as before. So you have to put them back. You draw them, you have to put them back. So there is a probability that they will be redrawn, etc., etc. And maybe multiple times, right? But you construct a new sample of 2,000 people out of this original sample through this random drawing with replacement. I think, Professor Binder most probably will talk or has talked about bootstrapping. Have you heard this? Does he talk about? So this is like bootstrap, right? So we do this. We draw a new US sample, and then we go to the and we run the profit, the new profit, and we get a new set of US coefficients. And we go to the Austrian sample and we draw with replacement from the Austrians. So we have now a new set of x's, and we have just estimated a new set of betas. We put them together, right? Construct another counterfactual probability like this, and then calculate, compute the covariate effect of the coefficient. So what have I got now? I have my initial point estimate, and now I have another set of 3 numbers, right? Or 2 numbers, the covariate and the coefficient effect, okay? I keep doing this 200 times. So now I have 200 pairs of covariate and coefficient effects, okay? And now with these 200 pairs, I compute the 95% confidence interval. I compute the interval within which 95% of these estimates lie, right? Of the, separately, the covariate and the coefficient effect, separately. And that gives me the 95% confidence interval for the initial point estimate that I had of the covariate and the coefficient. Are you with me or without me? You're with me? Yeah? Very much wishing to be without me. Okay. That's what we do, right? And this is not difficult to, program and to be able to do it. Okay. So I'm going to be showing you pictures, and again, don't memorize the pictures. Right? I'm not going to be asking you what is the coefficient effect on Sweden or something like that. But they are meant to illustrate what's going on. So here is stock market participation, right? And it's color coded. This is blue and this is violet, which has now turned into red or something. But anyway, so blue is the coefficient effect, and red is the covariate effect. Okay? So what do you see here? Point number one. So here, the US, it's always US, right? US minus country I, minus European country I. So here also the covariant effect and the coefficient. So if you see a positive number, then if you see a positive covariant effect, this means that US characteristics are more conducive to participation in the particular instrument, stocks, than German, Austrian, whatever characteristics, right? If you see a positive number. If you see a negative number, then the European characteristics are more conducive to participation. With coefficient effects, similar, right? Positive number in favor of the US, negative number in favor of the European country. So what do you see here? All the red bars, so all the covariant effects are positive in favor of the US. So for stock market participation. So the configuration of the US population, of characteristics in the US population, is more conducive to stock market participation than what we have in each of these European countries. Okay? However, when you look at coefficient effects, you get a reversal. You get a reversal for a very strong reversal for Sweden. You get a very strong reversal for Denmark, and you get a little bit of a reversal also for France. Although this may be more of an artifact, but it's small. Okay. What does that mean? That means that the economic environment is more conducive in Sweden and in Denmark and in France, is more conducive to stock market participation than the economic environment in the US. And I told you that these countries, Sweden and Denmark, are the ones that have higher stock market participation rates than the US. And I told you that they have some peculiar features, like the Social Security system that invests in stocks, right? So it's really giving you exposure to stock holding, whereas the US system does not. I mean, it's just a tax. Social Security taxes are just a tax. They don't familiarize you with anything that has to do with stocks. So there are reasons to believe that, yes, the economic environment in Sweden and Denmark is more conducive to stock market participation than the one in the US. And the cute thing here, and the very encouraging thing is, we didn't tell the data that, right? We didn't plug in any indicator of Social Security system or anything else. The data spoke to us, and they spoke in a way that's consistent with the overall economic environment in those Scandinavian countries, right? So, but you see that in practically all of the other countries, the coefficient effects are in favor of the US. Now, the mustaches, okay? So these are the confidence intervals. So if these mustaches cross the axis, and here we don't have any such example, I mean, we're getting close here, but here we're getting pretty statistically significant results for stockholding participation. If they cross the axis, then the thing is insignificant, right? But here it is not. Here we have participation in private business. And here you see that again Sweden is very conducive to participation, more conducive than the US. But in all of the other cases, we have some bars that are negative, but they are statistically insignificant. So this is Switzerland, and this is Denmark, and the mustache crosses the zero axis, so the x-axis. So they are insignificant. So it's only Sweden that's more conducive to private business holding among older people than the US. And you see that all of the coefficient effects are positive, but some are insignificant, like in England or in Switzerland. They're insignificant. And what do you also see? You also see that the mustaches, the range of the mustaches is much bigger. So in other words, the 95% confidence intervals are much wider in the participation in private business regressions than it was in Stockholm. And we were wondering about this, how to interpret this, that the results are not so great, right? We're not getting much statistical significance, so is it true that different countries are equally conducive to private businesses among older people as a whole? Or is there some statistical problem here, some econometric problem here? And then we looked at the data more carefully, and we found out that we could only get about 250 participants in private business in each country. Now that's a small number to draw inference from. There is a reason for this. These are 50 plus people, right? So to people who own a private business very often work for that private business. And when they retire, they sell it off, they give it to their children, they do something with it, right? But they don't keep owning the private business. Of course, some people do keep owning. We did get 250 people in each sample, but it's a small number. If we had done this, this would have been more appropriate to do in a population-wide survey, and then we would be getting more private business owners, and across all different ages and stuff like that. Would have been much more appropriate. But for this data set, we are getting a lot of insignificance, not necessarily because conditions are so similar, but because we have a small sample problem. Okay? Here is home ownership, and here you see, again, we are not telling the data that the Southerners like to own a home, right? And that Germans do not, right? We're not telling the data that, but the data is picking it up. Yeah. So you see that controlling for characteristics, the coefficient effects are, even comparing to the U.S., the coefficient effects in the South, and also in England and in Belgium, are going in the direction of the South. So for given characteristics, Italians, Spaniards, Greeks, English, and Belgians are more likely to be owning the house they live in than Americans are, right? You see that the opposite is the case for the other countries. You see that we mostly have statistically significant effects. Here, Switzerland is very much like the US, the covariant effect is not statistically significant. But the coefficient effects are statistically significant. What else do you see that you also saw for stocks in some cases, etc.? The effects go in the opposite direction. So if you look at the characteristics of Spaniards and you compare them to the characteristics of the US people have characteristics that are more conducive to homeownership. Maybe they are, richer, maybe they have age levels or whatever, as age distribution, education distribution, whatever, occupational distribution, that's more conducive to homeownership than the Spaniards do. So the covariant effects go in the opposite direction of the coefficient effects, but the coefficient effects are so big that they dominate, and you get a higher homeownership rate in Spain than you get in the US, right? And you see also in Greece, it's the same. In Italy, it's the opposite. You get bigger covariate effects. So the Italian homeownership rate is below the US, right? So you get an enormous, and here in Belgium also, you get a higher participation rate, homeownership rate in Belgium than in the US because they go in opposite directions. And actually, you know, the covariate characteristics here are statistically insignificant. So you get a lot of granularity, a lot of more information going from the raw difference in participation rates and going into these decompositions, right? But there is a problem. And the problem is these decompositions are a black box, right? You don't know. I mean, I just told you the Spanish population characteristics are less conducive to homeownership than the American. But which characteristic is that? I don't know. It's all characteristics taken together. The coefficients in Spain are more conducive. The economic environment is more conducive to homeownership, right? But which variable? What is exactly this? It could be culture, and I bet here a large part is culture, right? And what I was telling you, this practice of giving bequests, etc. But the decomposition is a little bit too aggregated. It does give you these black boxes, okay? Is that a bad thing? Well, it is a bad thing because I can't point my finger on something and tell you this is the reason. It is a good thing because coefficient effects, capture all the coefficients together. So they're a good thing compared to the alternative. You know the joke, old age is bad, but it's better than the alternative. Know this joke? Okay. Yes. So coefficient effects or covariate effects, so let's focus on coefficient effects. Coefficient effects are bad in the sense that they don't tell you which coefficient is behind the thing. But what is the alternative? The typical alternative is to introduce a country dummy in the regression. So you pull everything, right? And you put country dummies. So, but what does that do? What does that assume? That assumes that the only difference is in the shift parameter, in the constant for each country, right? If you just put country dummies, you are assuming that the responsiveness of stock market participation to income, to age, to education, etc., is the same across countries, right? And the only difference is in the level, in the constant. Okay? So if I'm comparing coefficient effects to introducing country dummies, then I will tell you coefficient effects are better because they are allowing all the coefficients to differ in whichever way they want to differ, right? Or the data tell us that they differ. And they give you a cumulative result, right? Of course, you could be pooling all the data and you could be interacting all country dummies with all variables. And then you would be doing something equivalent. But that's a huge estimation problem, right? And then again, it's too much information, right? I mean, it's already too much information to see the aggregate coefficient effect, right? The overall coefficient. Now imagine if I were telling you, but the income coefficient in Spain is bigger than that in the US, but the opposite is true of the you can't handle so much. We can't handle so much. So that's the kind of pros and cons.
Can I answer
Yeah.
that? So what you're trying to say that even though we say that the coefficient, the effect is like we have a lot of beta here. So like we change the difference would be like the different characteristic of US and Italians, for example, would be like 10 different coefficients at one time.
Precisely. So you go here, right?
Yeah.
These are the regressors. For each of these regressors, there is one coefficient. And each of these regressors define, the total of these regressors are the x's. They define the characteristics of these people. So we are allowing with the coefficient effect estimation, allowing for a difference in any combination of these coefficients, right? In any of these coefficients, yeah. But we cannot tell it's this coefficient or it's that, right? We are saying as a whole, coefficients contribute in this direction or in that direction, in favor of stock market participation, against stock market.
So like, for example, when just come to eliminate one like coefficient, like everything we mentioned, tell them really like just change when you introduce the dummy variable, like we can just use the different in one coefficient instead of owner to coefficient, right?
So very nice. So very nice. You're thinking ahead. So one. I mean, ahead. I was not even going to mention this, but something that you can do, and we have done it. I have done it in another paper on a completely different topic. Is to say we are going. Let's focus on a subset of these characteristics, right? And let's use the US coefficients on that subset, and then for the others, let's use the coefficients from Austria, right? And then you can sort of say, okay, that's the part of the coefficient differences that is due to this versus the other, right? To this subset. You can't go. I mean, at first it sounds great. We can further decompose everything, etc. But actually, then, suppose you do this, right? And then suppose you do the rest, right? But if you get, okay, so then I get this coefficient effect from this subset, and then I get a coefficient effect from that subset. And then I would have liked to add these two coefficient effects and get the overall coefficient effect, but I'm not getting that. The thing is non-linear, etc. It doesn't work. And then you start feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm trying to decompose something further, and I'm not decomposing it further because I'm ending up with a bigger sum total. So it is a little bit of an awkward situation. I mean, the paper, it appeared in a good journal, a very good journal, Journal of Monetary Economics. So that's my paper on East versus West Germans and how they handled reunification. So if you go to my website, the paper in the Journal of Monetary Economics does this, includes this, but you will already see there that it's a little bit of brain damage, the different, the referees insisted that we do this, so we did it, right? And we get some idea about possible different components, the role of possible different components, but it's not, it doesn't satisfy these additivity properties, etc. It makes it a little bit awkward.
Can we take a break?
Oh yes, absolutely. You have to keep reminding me because I'm the Energizer Bunny. I keep going, right? Okay, so